Educational Communications and this station present Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman. On this series, we explore the effects of human influence on the Earth's ecosystems and discuss solutions to environmental problems which affect the quality of life on this planet. Environmental Directions gives you the kind of information you need to help you participate in decisions impacting your community, the nation, and the world. Now, here's your host, Nancy Pearlman.
Hello. For the next half hour, we are going to be talking about nature walks in California with my guest, Charles Hood, who is a professor emeritus from the English department at Antelope Valley College and author of over 22 books. He has recently written California's Best Nature Walks. Step out of your car and right into nature. He's also a photographer. I've had the privilege of having him on our program with his previous books, Wild LA and Nature at Night. He has traveled to over 50 states and 80 countries and has encountered 6,500 species of birds and 1,000 species of mammals. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you back on the program.
Well, you're so gracious. What a great introduction. Thank you for having me.
I just thoroughly enjoy reading, looking at your books because they are delightful. You have a sense of humor. You have a few pages of what people should pay attention to when they're in a natural area, and your photographs are absolutely stunning. While we might not be able to cover all 32 sites that you have talked about in your most recent book, we are going to describe some of these wonderful places, whether or not they're wildlife sanctuaries, state and national parks, or monuments, or even arboretums and rest stops, national forests, tide pools, so many incredible places in California because we have so many unique ecosystems in this vast state, don't we?
Yes, thank you for noticing that. I think most people intuit that there's a lot of variety, but they don't know exactly all the different specifics, and that's perhaps something where I can come out and help with. Not that there's just a lot in general, but how does that lotness, how does that plenitude actually play out on the environment itself?
I like the fact that with each location that you mentioned, you describe how to get there, off of what freeway, and the difficulty of the walk. Usually easy walks. The mileage is usually from 0 to 3 miles, so you don't have to have those crampons or cleated boots or trekking poles. You can literally get out of your car and see things. And sometimes people aren't aware that there's nature around them everywhere. You have described places that are very common for people to go to, but maybe they were going to them for one reason, like the Mount Wilson Observatory, but weren't looking at the wildlife, the plants and animals. When they get up there in the Angeles National Forest, what else can they see?
There's a surprising abundance of tree species. People just think, oh, I went to the mountains, I saw a tree, or I saw some trees or something. But actually, one of the great things about California is the botanical diversity, and that includes 20 species of oaks and 20 species of pine tree. And so someplace like Mount Wilson, which has its own cultural attractions, so it's very important astronomy happened up there, but it also is just actually a great place to see a mix of tree species, and they do look different once you stop and say, hey, wait a minute, which one is which? And maybe you use a little app on your phone, or maybe you take some notes, and then you can realize, hey, today I just saw 5 new species of trees.
You talk about how one can see the tallest trees in the world and the oldest trees in the world. But when we talk about the oldest tree, the one that is identified as such is in a location that nobody wants to publicize. You can maybe see the 3,000-year-old trees, but not that 4,000-year-old tree.
Yeah, there's probably some bristlecone pines that are 5,000 years old, and the oldest measured one, they try to keep that a secret because of vandalism, although as with anything, if you are persistent, you could figure it out. Famously, they cut down the oldest tree once upon a time. That was on Wheeler Peak in Nevada, but here in California, they have now found living trees that were just just as old or older as the one that got cut down. So if you go up to the bristlecone pines in the White Mountains, east of the Sierras, you're going to probably be seeing the oldest or the next to oldest, even if it's not labeled as such. If you do any of the hikes up there, you're going to be around some very, 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 very old trees, close to maybe 5,000 years old, if not exactly the oldest.
And when you get to the Death Valley National Park, you can go and observe the desert pupfish. And I know I was very active in trying to save the Cyprindon diabolus species, which was found in only one waterhole in the entire world. And we did get it to be protected and not have the water diverted to a cattle ranch.
Yes, pupfish are interesting, aren't they? As you must know yourself, Nancy, that really we're looking at time when we're looking at these fish. These were something that came from a previous geological era almost, really, if you think about it, where you want to put the Pleistocene in relation to us. And they are adapted now to these microhabitats that were left behind as the water regime all changed. So we may not think of them as the same as a saber-toothed tiger or an imperial mammoth, but actually those are the kind of animals that are their kinfolk or sort of their age cohort, so to speak. Isn't that funny? You're looking at a saber-toothed tiger only as a tiny little fish.
But if you want to see some of those ancient fossils of species that don't exist anymore, where do you recommend people go?
Oh, you have to go to La Brea Tar Pits. Oh my gosh.
Right in the city of Los Angeles.
Right on Wilshire Boulevard, absolutely. And of course, notoriously, La Brea Tar Pit is tar, spoken twice, but really an astounding collection of Pleistocene fossils and very well displayed. It used to be called the George Page Museum, being rebranded now as the Tar Pit Museum, but absolutely right there by the LA County Museum of Art on Wilshire Boulevard, and also near a great car museum. If anyone wants to bring their teenage boys to see Bugatti Veyron, you could see that in a Mastodon on the same afternoon.
LA does have a lot of museums, whether or not it's cars, art. The Natural History Museum has beautiful exhibits and displays, and many places now have natural areas to show people what our native plant and animal life. Here in Southern California, the coastal sagebrush is important, a chaparral community, and you talk about the chaparral and how some people think it's dead when it's just being dormant.
Well, people don't know how to read the landscape sometimes. I'm sure you've heard this nonsense that, California doesn't have any seasons, and that's merely ignorance. It doesn't necessarily divide into the easy quadrants that Central Park does in New York, where fall is obviously October, November, clearly autumn. But for us, we have a great spring bloom. Sometimes it's the ceanothus starting as early as February, but it lasts well into late summer with rabbit bush out where I live. So that's blooming into October. So we have plenty of seasons. I used to joke we have 25 seasons if you really want to be honest about it. So sure, people think chaparral doesn't look like much, but that's simply they haven't had a chance to spend some time in it maybe.
A lot of people have traditionally thought of deserts as wastelands, but I absolutely adore the open space, the sky, what you can see, and there are wonderful flora and fauna to enjoy, as well as the sand itself. You talked about Kelso Dunes, which is one of my favorite locations, and how it might actually make some sounds.
Sure, Kelso is one of these tall dune faces, and the Kelso Dunes are a booming dune. And these also occur in Saudi Arabia, for example. It's an international possibility. Not all dunes boom, but some dunes do boom, and it's a combination of the grains of the sand need to be a certain size, and there has to be a certain slope, and there also then has to be the right moisture content in the sand. But Kelso is a great place to go, and when you jump off the top of the dune both feet and you land 5 feet down, and the resonating landslide that you cause is a great tuba-like booming sound. Oh, it's so fun. It's just lovely. It's just the thrill of a lifetime to be able to do that.
Of course, there's also a cultural history there, as well as the natural history.
The railroad depot that was the visitor center, last I heard, was closed because of the fires. I don't know if it's reopened yet or not, but that's a landscape that has been inhabited by Native Americans, of course, for 30,000 years, probably 20,000 years for sure. And then the American West was there, and then, of course, George Patton, the great American general of World War II, he trained his troops nearby to get ready for fighting Erwin Rommel in the deserts of North Africa. So we have lots of layers of history, from railroad train commerce and the opening of the American West all the way through to modern military.
You actually describe one of the missions in California, and of course there were numerous missions in the Spanish period when they went into what is now California, but they called it Alta California.
Yes, missions are a place of conflict, aren't they? Because the more we know about them, or the more we're honest about them now, people do speak of them as death camps and in genocidal kinds of language. That might be a little more confrontational than I'm comfortable with being, although I don't wish to at all deny that there was both physical and sexual violence being enacted upon the Native Americans. But at the same time, the missions were architecturally so influential. Things like Union Station, the train station in downtown Los Angeles, and lots of terracotta roofs and housing estates and so on. So the missions were a place of harm to Native Americans, and yet they also contributed to the myth of California as a sort of eternal sunshine and the place with these great little shaded patios and tile roofs where we kind of have the hacienda kind of lifestyle that lends itself then to like Palm Springs and citrus groves. So it's complicated. It's a very complicated history, I think, but it's often a good place to see nature too, particularly La Purísima by Lompoc. There's just fabulous hiking there.
Some of these natural areas also have historic connections to the movie industry here in Southern California, whether or not it's in the Owens Valley, where a lot of westerns were filmed, or just north of the city of Los Angeles at Vasquez Rock Natural Area.
Yeah, that's run by the county of Los Angeles, named after a bandito who's probably not a very nice person, I suspect, but nonetheless, we romanticize the bandits once they're no longer threatening us directly. How will we feel about the Somali pirates, I wonder, in 200 years? Will there be, sort of song and dance routines about them? But anyway, Vasquez Rocks is up-tilted sandstone beds, siltstone beds of rock, and wow, it's just so grippy. Like there's little rugosities everywhere, so you can really go rock climbing without needing technical equipment. It's not slick and hard like glacial polished granite in Yosemite. It's got a much more textured kind of feel, and there's different slopes. So pretty much anybody who wants to go scrambling, any ability, age 2 to grade 102, we can find a slope that's appropriate for you at Vasquez Rocks. Free to go there, open 7 days a week. So yeah, lots of movies, maybe 400 different movies were filmed there, including the live-action Flintstones, for those of you listeners who like your pop culture. But it really is visually a very stunning place to go walking.
What about the arboretums? They're rather non-natural. They have brought in plants from all over. You find arboretums throughout the country, throughout California. Some specialize in the plants of their local area. And of course, some of the native wildlife enjoy the plants at the arboretums because it's free food. Why should one visit a botanical garden as opposed to going out into a natural area?
I think you're raising a really interesting point, and I'm glad we're able to cover that in this session today, because I think too often we have romanticized pure nature or high nature or good nature or pristine nature, and that's just a fallacy. There is no such thing as pristine nature. Certainly the Native Americans, as I mentioned earlier, were here long before the Anglo-Europeans arrived, and they were managing and interacting and stewarding their landscape. So the idea of this untouched wilderness is sort of romantic balderdash, to be honest. And then at the same time, the sense that, if it's in a city or it's near a city or an urban area, it must somehow be contaminated. I really refuse to buy into that. It's this sort of idea of nature as a virginal woman, and if you lose your intactness, you're somehow sullied or devalued. And the reality is, even in Yosemite, they have police sirens, they've got smog, they've got fires, they've got a jail in Yosemite Valley, as most of your listeners know. They've got a police force. Bears are hit by cars every single year. And at the same time, as you mentioned, in the botanical gardens, if you want to see a deer, a good place to go is the Redding, and go to the botanical garden in Redding, California, in Northern California. And that's a great place to see a mule deer. Let's just be honest. Nature is everywhere around us, and there are no hard and fast boundaries.
And you have made it so easy for people to find some of those natural areas. I'm really pleased that you have described these locations and what one can see in terms of walks, not hikes. You don't have to be a major outdoor enthusiast, adventurer who travels for hours on a trail. These are places and flora and fauna that you can see when you just step out of your car and take a small walk.
Thank you for noticing that. And I think there is a sort of mistaken feeling that a hike has to be how many miles did you go and how many hours and how heavy was your pack. And the reality is sometimes we don't have that much energy. We don't have that much time. We've got kids with us.
What I enjoyed about your book on California's Best Nature Walks is it wasn't like the old-fashioned field guides that just listed the animals or the plants and didn't really give us a sense of the location of the place, where to go, what to see. It was just some book for us to help identify some species. You actually are helping people know where to go and what kind of environment to enjoy.
Well, I hope they feel included. I hope they feel invited. Nancy, that's something that you and I think are both committed to, the idea of, I don't want to say social justice, that's kind of a big fancy word, but certainly nature is our heritage for everybody. And if you can't walk as far as somebody else, we still got a place you can go. So I want to be inclusive in a very broad-minded, generous kind of way.
In your book, California's Best Nature Walks, and we are going to talk more about some of the wonderful flora and fauna in California when we return with my guest, Charles Hood.
Environmental Directions with Nancy Pearlman continues with further discussion of the world's critical ecological issues. For more information, you may call 310-559-9160 or go to www.ecoprojects.org. Now, here's Nancy.
I'm speaking with Charles Hood, who has authored over 20 books, including Wild LA, Nature at Night, and his recent book, California's Best Nature Walks. Step out of your car and ride into nature. Let's take that title, Step Out of Your Car, because I was very surprised to see a few pages where you talk about going along a major freeway from Southern California to Northern California and stopping at a rest area, not just to use the facilities, but to look at the wildlife. Is that the case at every rest area?
No, but it's a surprising number. The whole history of rest areas on I-5 is sort of, again, contentious and complicated. If we go back to even as early as the 1930s, there should have been more rest areas, and originally they were just some tree-lined pullovers where you could actually just do some rest or have a little picnic. And then as the interstates built out, the funding for multiple rest areas wasn't prolific, so we should have more rest areas per capita and more frequently aligned along the freeway. They got planned but never funded, never built. But the ones that we do have are sometimes really spectacular. There's one on the 101 in Gaviota Pass. It's really a beautiful place just to be, even if you don't have lunch or even if you don't need to use the facilities, or the one that's in the book, the Camp Roberts one on Highway 101. So we're north of Paso Robles at that point. Just a beautiful place to see our endemic yellow-billed magpie. One of the only place in the world you can see that is in California. Great big obvious bird with yellow-billed magpies. They just like it there. They like maybe some free food from us, and then maybe they like the fact that there are maybe fewer hawks bugging them. But whatever it is, that's a good place to go.
I just love the pictures of the flowers, the insects, the reptiles, the mammals. You have shown so much beauty of what people can see here in California and the landscape. We talked about the deserts, but one of the most famous places is seeing the tufa spires in the Mono Basin National Scenic Area in the Inyo National Forest. This is a gorgeous place to see lots of different species too.
Yeah, famous as a fall migration spot when all the eared grebes are there and the phalaropes and the white pelicans, Mono Lakes, the stopover, all the breeding California gulls that are there. So it became part of our everyday consciousness in the 1980s due to the legal battles that were successfully fought against the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power that was lowering the lake levels very irresponsibly, and the Mono Lake Committee fought back. Good for them. Now it's become, I think, increasingly popular. I can remember going there many, many years ago, and there was just a dirt road and no fee, and you could actually, I hate to say this, you could just camp there overnight. Nobody cared. And now it's a little more developed, a little more heavily visited, but nonetheless, just as beautiful as always. So sure, if people haven't been to Mono Lake, it is not overhyped. It is absolutely worth a visit, particularly during fall migration.
You have published over 800 photographs. How many do you actually take to include in a book like this?
When you illustrate a book that's sort of a dance between yourself, your ideals, and the physical reality, the book can only have so many pages. And so I generally have twice as many pictures in my mind that I would like to include as the editor is actually going to let me print on the page. That's just the reality. Go to a buffet, you can't eat every piece of food there is. You've got to make some choices. So some images are in and some are out. That's the reality of making a book.
You have encountered over 7,500 species of birds and mammals. You haven't given me a count of how many reptiles, insects you've encountered, how many plants you have encountered. What does your life list look like?
I'm really really trying to manage my life list, oh my gosh, it can take over. I always joke, like, I'm a reformed addict. I'm in recovery on my lists. And yet, the way my mind works, I have a pretty good idea of where I stand on any given list. I stopped keeping a tree list. It was just getting to be too insidious, I guess. These things take over your life.
I recall many years ago going to the Channel Islands and seeing the release of the island foxes, having them reintroduced into their native habitat. You talk about one place where one can see them, but they are doing okay now?
Yes. What happened with the island foxes, there were a couple things. There were some issues of illness and so on, but primarily things just got out of whack. And so DDT had killed the bald eagles, and then that allowed golden eagles to move into that territory. Normally, a bald eagle is sort of dominant over a golden eagle, and normally the golden eagles would hunt mammalian prey, so rabbits and foxes, for example, because the island fox is a pretty small little critter, and then the bald eagles are piscivores. They're eating fish, coastal fish right out of the ocean. And so when the bald eagles disappeared because of DDT and other consequences, golden eagles moved in and they were really wiping out the foxes. And so they had to get the golden eagles to go back to the mainland where they belonged, get the bald eagles back out on the islands where they had always been, and then breed some extra foxes at the Santa Barbara Zoo and other places and get the population stabilized. But oh, it's so fun. They're so cute. Oh my gosh. Yeah, you can see them on San Miguel. Yeah, there's lots of places you can go. There's Scorpion Anchorage on Santa Cruz Island. Reached out of Ventura Harbor on a little 1-hour boat trip. Oh my gosh, it is so fun. Like, everybody loves them.
You also talk about other coastal areas, and California has a large coastline, and you specifically mention some of the tide pools in Pacific Grove. But I recall as a child down in Orange County, we were going to the tide pools, and unfortunately people were taking the tide pool life. That should never happen now. Is all tide pool life protected and people should leave it and not take any of the species home?
Well, sure, it's legally protected. Whether it's culturally protected, that might be an ongoing conversation. Sometimes people come from a different kind of mindset. I remember being in Denali National Park recently up in Alaska, and I saw people picking up caribou antlers. I think they were coming from the culture of the Deep South. For state parks, you could pick up white-tailed deer antlers, and I was trying to explain, you're in a national park. This is a federal park, and these caribou antlers have a purpose. They're returning calcium to the rodents. You cannot take these home. This is not a trophy gathering. People were sort of shocked, like, what? I can't just pick up anything I want? What's wrong with you, boy? This is nature. It belongs to me. Like, well, no, actually it doesn't. It's a national park. We have some rules. So I don't know on tide pools if people do things out of malice or simply just carelessness. It is true Orange County had better tide pools historically. We have a lot of people. We've got a lot of traffic going through those tide pools. So in recommending the one up in Monterey, in some ways I'm picking a tide pool that is pretty heavily visited, and so a few more visitors probably won't do any damage. And if you ask me, what's your favorite tide pool? I might not tell anybody. It might be better just to leave it to just one person a year or 10 people a year rather than 1,000, that come to Monterey. But nonetheless, Monterey's pretty good shape. I gotta say, some really beautiful stuff.
I just loved reading your descriptions of these places, what can be seen. Very short, but very full of information, and your humor was always enjoyable when you wrote about the places, about the wildlife. Your pictures are stunning. I'm so thrilled that you included the Tule Elk, because when I was in high school, that was one of the very first environmental organizations, the Committee for the Preservation of the Tule Elk, that I joined. And the species were down to about 22 individuals. We got legislation passed. We got a national wildlife refuge, and the Tule Elk became so many in the Owens Valley area, they put them up in Point Reyes where people could enjoy them.
Yeah, the Point Reyes herds, as you know, they're a little bit contentious again, them versus the ranches. They were always there. The Tule Elk did arrive at all the way up at Point Reyes naturally. That's kind of the boundary line. The subspecies called Roosevelt elk, they came down from the northwest part of the coast and would kind of reach the coastal redwoods north of Point Reyes. And then Point Reyes is the edge of the Tule Elk, which were historically centered on the Great Central Valley when that was all marshland. And then we now have introduced Rocky Mountain elk as well in the Tehachapi's, and how they're all going to interact, because they're all populations are doing pretty well, actually. Yeah, so how the Tule elk that were introduced into the Owens Valley as a safety measure, how they're going to interact with the Rocky Mountain elk up at the Tehachapi's, and then how they're going to talk, with the Roosevelt elk when all those populations reach in Point Reyes. This is a great mystery, how it's going to dilute the gene pool or perhaps enhance it, or we'll have some type of hybrid form. But It is true. You can certainly see elk all these places, and they're just magnificent. And they bugle and they joust, and it's just all the regular things you see in a nature movie.
You cover in your book over 32 areas, from seashores to parks to refuges to many different kinds of locations. How did you choose them? Because there are probably hundreds more you could have described.
I guarantee the readers are going to be mad because I didn't put in their favorite area, but then again, they might be glad I didn't put in their favorite area. So the reality is, for our listeners out there, authors do not have free reign. At least I certainly never have. And editors tell you, if you do this project, here's your quota. And it's actually, books are commodities. And so quite literally, I've got a word count and I can't exceed it. And that's tied into contracts for printing. Printers expecting to do so many pages in color on this kind of paper. And that's even as something as mundane as if we print in China, which historically we used to the last 20 years. There is space in a shipping container pre-purchased for X amount of goods, X volume of weight. And so it's not like I can write a 400-page book and no one will mind. Absolutely someone will mind. And then my editor's going to say, do you want to cut these chapters or shall I?
But this book is less than 200 pages and mostly pictures with some descriptions and information, where to go, what to see. Of course, you included the redwoods. How can you not? They're gorgeous trees. When you're standing under a redwood, you can barely see how tall they are.
Isn't that an interesting philosophical problem? You know, do we know the tree if we can't experience it at all the different levels? So it is true for us as relatively small bipeds. Some of us are barely 2 meters tall. We might not really understand the full scale of the redwood, but we can nonetheless appreciate that bottom 1/100th of it, shall we say. The bottom slice, we can participate in that visually. We can smell it, walk around in it. That's another one where, for protection reasons, I couldn't say where the tallest tree in the world actually is, but I can give readers some hints. If you want to see some pretty tall trees that might just be the tallest, go up to Redwood National Park. And then, of course, the sequoias are in there, too. The other redwood trees, the High Sierra species.
You've described many birds, have pictures of gorgeous birds. You yourself have identified over 6,500 birds, which is a large number, and 1,000 species of mammals. And you included one of my favorite mammals, the bats. I've seen and stood under a cave where millions of bats flew out of the cave in Malaysia. I've been under the bridge in Texas seeing thousands of bats. How many bats do we have here in California?
Roughly speaking, about 25 species of bats occur in California. Yes, for those people who want the thrill of seeing a lot of bats at once, the Congress Avenue Bridge in Austin, Texas has got Mexican free-tailed bats numbering in the many, many millions. They don't always emerge every single night. No one's quite sure what the trigger is, but most nights they come pouring out in these giant flocks. Also in California, in Davis, off of I-80, the so-called Yolo Bypass is the name, the freeway between Davis and Sacramento. That's a good place to see a big emergence of bats. As you mentioned, I put bats in the lava caves up in Northern California.
Obviously, you're going to have to come back and tell us more about the many different other animals and plants and geologic locations, beautiful environments and ecosystems that you have visited in your over 80 countries that you have visited and the 50 states here in the United States. You'll have to talk about some of your new interesting books, projects that you are working on, including an essay on mink coats, an essay about the role of water in the art of the American West, a book about fire insurance maps, a book about the oak trees of the world, a book about birds of Los Angeles, and an alternate history of Lewis and Clark that's set in outer space. Quite a variety of different kinds of topics, but how do they get this incredibly wonderful reference guide, enjoyable guide just to read if you can't go to all those places? California's Best Nature Walks. Step out of your car and right into nature. What's your website?
The book is available from Timber Press, my publisher. And then if anyone has a question or a comment or they want to give me some feedback or ask anything, I'm at charleshoodbooks.com, and I'll just slow down and say Charles Hood Books, with all this one word, .com. The book is available everywhere.
And that is spelled CharlesHoodbooks.com. I'd like to thank you so very much for letting us know how we can go out, enjoy nature, see so much, whether or not it's the armchair adventurer reading your book, looking at the pictures, or someone who's following some of your directions and getting themselves into nature. You write beautifully, with humor, with description, wonderful reference guide. Thank you so very much for making this information available. Thank you for sharing your stories with us. Science. Thank you for being my guest.
Thank you. What an honor it has been to spend time with you.
I certainly enjoy having you and look forward to hearing about more of your adventures. I have been speaking with Charles Hood, who is Professor Emeritus in the English Department at the Antelope Valley College, and author and photographer of California's Best Nature Walks. Step out of your car and right into nature. I'm Nancy Pearlman. Thank you very much for joining us, and do tune in again next week.
If you would like free information about these environmental issues, go to www.ecoprojects.org or call 310-559-9160. Environmental Directions with your host, Nancy Pearlman, is a community affairs program of the nonprofit organization Educational Communications and this station.